A family photograph from 1895 appeared ordinary at first glance. However, upon closer inspection of the girl in the image, something remarkable was revealed. The humid climate of New Orleans caused everything to adhere together, from papers to fingertips and shirts to skin. Even the atmosphere seemed dense and clinging. Dr. Vivian Rousseau, working in her small Louisiana Historical Archives office, wiped her brow and adjusted the desk fan. Despite the oppressive August heat in the city, the climate-controlled vault housing the photographs remained refreshingly cool. She had dedicated 3 months to cataloging the TME collection, which consisted of hundreds of photographs, documents, and artifacts from one of America's oldest African-American neighborhoods. Families had largely donated these items while clearing out attics and during estate sales, rescuing pieces of history from obscurity and landfills. Vivian opened a well-preserved mahogany box with aged velvet lining. Inside lay a single photograph in a detailed gilt frame. It showed 3 people posed in what seemed to be an affluent parlor, complete with heavy curtains framing a window and a patterned rug on polished wooden floors. The couple was seated in upholstered chairs, the man wearing a dark suit with a watch chain visible across his vest, and the woman in an elaborate dress featuring leg of mutton sleeves and intricate beading. Standing between them was a girl around 10 years old, dressed in white with layers of lace and ribbon, her hair styled in careful ringlets, holding a book. The image exuded pride and prosperity. It was a formal portrait, an expensive endeavor in 1895, commissioned to document success, demonstrate respectability, and create family treasures. Vivian cautiously turned the frame to find a label on the back, reading the Beaumont family, November 1895, and the name Farrow, Photography Studio, Royal Street, in flowing script. She recognized the studio as belonging to Armand Farrow, a premier New Orleans photographer in the late 19th century, known for his portraits of the city's Creole elite, including some of the wealthiest free people of color in the South. Returning the photograph to the light, Vivian examined it more closely with a magnifying glass, noting exquisite details such as the grain of the wooden furniture, fabric textures, and book titles on a shelf behind the family. Suddenly, a shadow or mark caught her eye at the girl's neckline, just above the lace collar. Adjusting her magnifying glass and leaning closer, she froze, her breath catching. Using the archive's high-resolution scanner, acquired 6 months prior, Vivian prepared the photograph. Despite a tremor of anticipation, her hands moved with practiced precision. The device captured details far beyond human perception, revealing hidden stories within old images. Initiating the scan at 4,800 dpi, she watched as the machine's light bar moved slowly across the photograph. The process took nearly 10 minutes. Upon completion, Vivian imported the large file into her image analysis software. On her screen, the Beaumont family appeared with remarkable clarity. She zoomed in on the girl's face and neck, her heart racing as the image enlarged. The white dress's lace collar covered most of the child's neck, but where the fabric slightly parted, marks were visible. Enhancing the contrast and adjusting the lighting, the marks became clearer, revealing deliberate scarring, linear patterns, and raised tissue forming specific shapes. She could discern letters or numbers, partially obscured by the collar's angle. Her stomach tightened as she recognized similar marks from her research on slavery in the antebellum South. Enslaved people were sometimes branded or scarred with their enslaver's initials or identification numbers, a brutal and dehumanizing practice treating people as marked property. However, the photograph was taken in 1895, 30 years after the 13th Amendment abolished slavery. The girl would have been born around 1885, 2 decades into freedom, making such marks impossible. Vivian zoomed in further, scrutinizing every visible inch of the scarring. She could identify the letter M and possibly the number 7 or the letter J. The scar tissue appeared well healed, suggesting the marks were made years prior. She stared at the full image again. The Beaumonts appeared prosperous, educated, and respectable in a setting suggesting wealth and social standing. Everything proclaimed freedom, dignity, and success, except for the scars hidden beneath the little girl's collar. Vivian opened her notes application and began typing, Beaumont family, 1895. Possible slave markings on child born post-emancipation. Inconsistent with timeline. Need to investigate. Family history, child's origin, legal records, adoption documents. She accessed the Louisiana Vital Records database, searching for birth certificates and family records. While Beaumont was a common name in the New Orleans Creole community, she needed specifics to understand who this family was and where the little girl came from. Vivian drove to the Louisiana State Archives in Baton Rouge, 80 miles from New Orleans, with copies of the photograph and preliminary research. The vital records, including birth certificates, marriage licenses, and death certificates from the 1890s, were stored there, many still not digitized. The quiet research room housed genealogists and a graduate student. Vivian requested records related to anyone named Beaumont in Orleans Parish between 1880 and 1900. An hour later, a clerk wheeled out 3 boxes of documents. Vivian started with birth records, finding several Beaumont children born in the 1880s. Matching them to the family in the photograph required cross-referencing addresses, parents' names, and other information. Most birth certificates from that era were sparse. Then, she found something promising. Beaumont, Marie Claire, born November 3, 1885, to parents Etienne Beaumont and Josephine Beaumont Navo, residence 427, Esplanade Avenue. Vivian checked her copy of the photograph. The girl appeared about 10 years old in 1895, aligning with an 1885 birth year. The timing matched. She searched for more records on Etienne and Josephine Beaumont. Etienne appeared in the 1890 city directory as a merchant and property owner on Canal Street. Josephine's name appeared in society notices in the New Orleans Daily Picayune for fundraising events, church activities, and charitable organizations. This was a prominent family. But how did Marie Claire get those scars? Vivian requested adoption records. Louisiana had maintained formal adoption proceedings since the 1870s, although many adoptions in the Creole community were informal. The official records were incomplete, but she found a document dated March 1891 that made her pulse quicken. Petition for adoption. Etienne and Josephine Beaumont seeking to legally adopt Marie Claire. Approximate age 6 years. Currently in their care. Child's origins unclear. Petition granted. April 1891. The child's origins were unclear. At age 6 in 1891, Marie Claire had been formally adopted despite an 1885 birth certificate listing them as her biological parents. Something didn't add up. Vivian photographed the document and continued searching, needing to know where Marie Claire actually came from and how she ended up with the Beaumonts. In the property records, she found a deed dated January 1891 showing Etienne Beaumont purchasing a small house in Playmine Parish, 70 miles south of New Orleans, for $800, a significant sum for a modest structure. Vivian made notes. Adoption finalized April 1891. Property purchased January 1891, 3 months earlier. Connection. Why would a wealthy New Orleans merchant buy rural property in Playmine Parish? She requested available records from Playmine Parish for 1890 to 1891, knowing it would take days to arrive. Meanwhile, she had another resource, the Farreau Photography Studio records if they still existed. Armand Farreau's studio operated on Royal Street from 1878 until his death in 1912. His granddaughter had donated his business records to the historic New Orleans collection in the 1960s. Appointment books, client lists, financial ledgers, and a detailed log describing each photograph. Vivian spent an afternoon turning the pages of Farreau's 1895 appointment book, meticulously written in French, including dates, times, client names, portrait types, and notes. She found the entry for November 1895. Beaumont family portrait. MCU Etienne Beaumont. Madame Josephine Beaumont. Daughter Marie Claire. Full formal setting, 3 poses taken. Client requested highest quality, important family record. Payment $25. $25 was expensive, equivalent to $800 today. The Beaumonts spared no expense, but it was Farreau's personal notes at the bottom that made Vivian catch her breath. The child, very still, well-behaved. Madame Beaumont, particular about the girl's collar, adjusted it multiple times before allowing exposure. The child bears marks at the throat, visible despite careful positioning. Did not inquire. Family's private matter, but such marks on one so young trouble the conscience. Farrow had seen the scars and noticed their concealment, troubling him enough to record it. Vivian checked the studio's financial records. In January 1891, the same month Etienne purchased the Plaquemines property, there was an entry showing a payment to Farrow of $50 with a notation, special commission. Discretion required. No archive copies. $50, twice the cost of the formal family portrait for what? What photographic work required such discretion? Vivian's mind raced. Had Farrow photographed Marie Claire when she first came to the Beaumonts? Had he documented something that needed to be kept secret? The studio records indicated Farrow kept glass plate negatives in chronological order. The curator said most plates from the 1890s survived. She requested access to the January 1891 plates. 2 hours later, she sat with a box of glass negatives, each sleeved and labeled. She worked through them chronologically. January 1st, 1891, a wedding portrait. January 5th, a family. January 9th, an elderly man. Then, dated January 12th, 1891, a plate labeled only Private Commission 127. Vivian lifted the plate and held it to the light. The image was a portrait of a small child, perhaps 5 or 6, standing against a plain backdrop. The child wore a simple dress, her hair uncared for, her expression haunted, with wide eyes and a thin face. Around her neck were clearly visible scars, letters and numbers. M7J. Vivian stared, her hands trembling. This was Marie Claire before the Beaumonts, before the dresses and hair, before the collars that hid her scars. This was documentation of a rescued child. Vivian drove south on Highway 1, following the Mississippi River through Louisiana's sugarcane country. The landscape was flat and green, with houses and old plantation remains. Plaquemines Parish was rural, its economy tied to agriculture. The parish courthouse was in the town of Plaquemines. Vivian had called, and the clerk, Dorothy, had pulled the records related to the property Etienne Beaumont purchased in 1891. It's unusual, Dorothy said, spreading documents on the table. City folks didn't buy property out here unless they had family or business. And this land wasn't farmable, just a house and scrubland. Vivian examined the deed. The previous owner was listed as Estate of Jacques Mercier, deceased. A note indicated the property had been seized for unpaid taxes and sold at auction, with Etienne Beaumont as the only bidder. Do you have any records on Jacques Mercier? Vivian asked. Dorothy returned with a folder. Not much. He died in 1890. No known heirs. But there's this. She pulled out a sheriff's report dated November 1890. The report detailed a raid on Mercier's property following complaints. What the sheriff found shocked Vivian. Upon investigation of the Mercier residence, discovered 3 Negro children, ages approximately 4 or 8 years, being held in conditions of servitude. Children bore marks of branding and physical abuse. Mercier claimed children were apprenticed to him legally, but could produce no documentation. Children removed to parish custody. Mercier charged with unlawful detention and assault. 3 children. One of them must have been Marie Claire. Vivian's hands shook as she read further. Children unable to provide information about their origins appear to have been taken at young ages with no memory of families. Scars indicate they may have been marked by previous captors. Investigation into broader trafficking operation recommended. What happened to Jacques Mercier? Vivian asked. Dorothy checked her notes. Died in parish jail before trial. Heart failure according to the death certificate. The case was closed and the children were placed in an orphanage in New Orleans, St. Mary's Home for Colored Children. Vivian felt pieces clicking into place. Marie Claire had been rescued from Mercier's house in late 1890, placed in an orphanage, and adopted by the Beaumonts in early 1891. But why had they purchased Mercier's property? She found the answer in a legal document dated February 1891, testimony of Etienne Beaumont in the matter of children rescued from Jacques Mercier property. Mr. Beaumont states that upon learning of children held in Plaquemines Parish, he investigated the matter personally. He purchased the Mercier property in order to secure any evidence or documentation that might identify the children or their origins. Among items found in the house were ledgers indicating Mercier had been part of a larger operation kidnapping freeborn Negro children and selling them into illegal servitude. Ishan had bought the property to find evidence. He had been trying to solve the mystery of where these children came from. Back in New Orleans, Vivian requested all records from St. Mary's Home for Colored Children. The orphanage had closed in 1924, its records transferred to the Catholic Archdiocese. Most had been damaged in Hurricane Betsy in 1965, but some records survived. What she found was heartbreaking and infuriating. The intake records from November 1890 listed 3 children brought from Plaquemines Parish. Child 1, female, approximately 6 years, unable to state name, bears marking M7J on neck. Child 2, male, approximately 8 years, unable to state name, bears marking M4P on shoulder. Child 3, female, approximately 4 years, unable to state name, bears marking M2K on back. The children had been so young when taken that they couldn't remember their own names or origins. They had been reduced to numbers and letters branded into their skin. Vivian found correspondence from the orphanage director to authorities, desperately trying to identify the children and find their families. One letter to the New Orleans Police Department dated December 1890 detailed the problem. "We believe these children were kidnapped from their families and held in servitude, part of a criminal enterprise that may involve numerous perpetrators across multiple parishes. The marks on their bodies suggest systematic identification, possibly indicating many more victims. We implore your department to investigate thoroughly." The police response was cursory. Matter investigated. No evidence of broader conspiracy. Children likely orphaned by yellow fever or other epidemic, taken in by Mercier with good intentions. Unfortunate situation, but no crime proven. No crime proven, despite the scars, the conditions, everything. But Ishan Beaumont hadn't accepted that conclusion. Vivian found more evidence of his personal investigation, letters to sheriffs asking about missing children, similar cases, anyone who might recognize the markings. One response from a sheriff in St. James Parish dated March 1891 provided a lead. "We had a similar case in 1888. Family reported their daughter taken from a church picnic. Girl, aged 3, name of Clara. Never found her. But the description of the markings you describe matches a child seen at a work camp upriver. The camp was raided, but most children there had been moved before we arrived. Only found 2 boys, both too traumatized to speak." Vivian spent the next week tracking down every reference to missing children in Louisiana between 1885 and 1890. The pattern that emerged was chilling. Dozens of reports of children disappearing, mostly from poor rural families, mostly very young. The cases were rarely investigated thoroughly. When children were found in servitude, they were placed in orphanages, but almost never reunited with families. The marking system suggested organization. M7J likely meant something. Maybe the M indicated Mercier. The number indicated sequence or location, and the letter indicated what? Vivian found a report from a federal investigator dated 1892, a year after Marie Ciele's adoption, outlining a network of kidnapping and re-enslavement operating across the South. The investigator estimated hundreds of children had been taken and sold to farms, work camps, and private households as unpaid labor. The report concluded, despite clear evidence of systematic child trafficking, local authorities show little interest in prosecution. Many victims are from families too poor or powerless to demand justice. This investigation is hereby closed due to lack of cooperation from local officials. Vivian found Ishan Beaumont's papers in the archives of the Amistad Research Center at Tulane University, including business correspondence, property records, and a journal from 1890 to 1895. She requested the journal. The fragile book's pages were yellowed. Ishan's handwriting was elegant and detailed. The entry dated November 20th, 1890, made Vivian's eyes water. Today, I learned of the children found in Plaquemines. 3 souls stolen from their families, marked like animals, used as slaves 30 years after emancipation. The police say there is nothing to be done. The man who held them is dead. The children cannot remember their origins. They will go to an orphanage and likely never know who they truly are. I cannot accept this. Josephine and I have been blessed with wealth and position. If we do not use these advantages to fight such injustice, what purpose does our prosperity serve? I have resolved to investigate personally. If these children have families searching for them, I will find those families. Over the following months, Ishan documented his investigation. He visited the Mercier property and found ledgers hidden, records of children taken, dates, locations, and buyers. He copied everything and turned the originals over to authorities, though he noted he had little faith in their willingness to act. The entry dated January 10, 1891, described meeting Marie Claire at St. Mary's Orphanage. The child they call number 7 is small for her age, with large eyes that have seen too much suffering. When I showed her the ledger entries, trying to find anything that might identify her origins, she touched the marking on her neck and said only, "Mama." It is the first personal memory she has shared with anyone at the orphanage. The marking reads M7J. According to Mercier's ledgers, she was acquired in July 1887 near Thibodaux, age approximately 2 years. The J may indicate July. The seller was listed only as DuPont, likely an alias. I have written to authorities in Lafourche Parish asking about any reports of a missing child from that time. Vivian flipped ahead. Ishan's investigation consumed him. He traveled across southern Louisiana, interviewed families who had lost children, and spent enormous sums hiring private investigators. He found the families of the other 2 children rescued from Mercier's house and facilitated reunions, but Marie Claire's family remained elusive. No one in Thibodaux recognized her description or her disappearance. The trail went cold. The entry dated March 15, 1891, detailed a painful decision. After 4 months of searching, I have found no trace of Marie Claire's family. It is possible they died in the yellow fever epidemic of 1888. It is possible they moved away or the records were lost. I cannot continue the search indefinitely. And meanwhile, the child remains in an orphanage waiting. Josephine and I have decided to adopt her. We will give her our name, our home, our love. We will tell her the truth about where she came from when she's old enough to understand. And we will never stop hoping that someday, somehow, her original family might be found. Vivian's research took an unexpected turn when she received an email from Margaret Thibodaux, a Beaumont family descendant, retired teacher living in Lafayette. Margaret recognized her great-great-grandmother's maiden name and had seen a news article about Vivian's work with the archives. They met at a cafe in the French Quarter. Margaret brought a box of family papers that had been in her attic for decades, letters, photographs, and documents passed down through generations, but never examined. My grandmother always said there were family secrets, Margaret explained. But she died before she could tell me what they were. Maybe these papers will help. Vivian opened the box carefully. Inside were bundles of letters tied with ribbon organized by date. Most were routine family correspondence, but one bundle stood out. Letters between Josephine Beaumont and Sister Marie Teasy, a nun who had worked at St. Mary's Orphanage. The letters dated from 1895 to 1910, long after Marie Claire's adoption. Vivian read through them, finding discussions of orphanage fundraising, church events, and social matters. Then she found a letter from 1897 that made her heart race. Dear Josephine, I write with news that may bring both joy and sorrow. A woman came to the orphanage yesterday asking about children who passed through our care in 1890. She has been searching for her daughter taken from her in Thibodaux in 1887 when the child was just 2 years old. The woman was herself enslaved at that time, illegally held on a remote farm despite the war's end. She escaped in 1889 but was unable to return for her daughter until she had established herself in New Orleans and earned enough money to hire an investigator. She described a small mark her daughter had, a birthmark shaped like a crescent moon on the child's left shoulder blade. She also remembered that when the child was taken, the individual who abducted her was known as Dupont, though she suspected it was a pseudonym. Josephine, I have a feeling this woman could be Marie Claire's biological mother. I didn't provide any concrete information, but I did share your contact information. I trust one haven't overstepped, but a mother's affection warrants the chance for a reunion with her child. Vivian's hands quivered. Marie Claire's mother had located her. After a decade apart, after escaping unlawful servitude herself, after years of searching, she had tracked down her daughter. But what subsequently transpired? Had Josephine facilitated the reunion? Had Marie Claire, raised as a Beaumont for 6 years, retained any memory of her birth mother? Vivian discovered the answer in the subsequent letter, dated 2 weeks later, penned by Josephine. Dear Sister Marie Teasy, I must inform you of what occurred when Claudine Tebaido visited our residence. I confess I initially felt apprehension, concern that we might lose Marie Claire, whom we cherish as deeply as if she were our own flesh and blood. However, when Claudine laid eyes on Marie Claire and Marie Claire saw her, something remarkable unfolded. The child, who had no conscious recollection of her mother, immediately rushed to her. She exclaimed, "You're the lady from my dreams." They embraced and wept, and I joined them in their tears. Vivian continued reading Josephine's letter, tears cascading down her face. Etienne and I were confronted with an impossible dilemma. Legally, Marie Claire is our adopted daughter. We could have denied Claudine any interaction with her, but how could we deny a mother who had endured so much to find her child? How could we deny Marie Claire the opportunity to know her birth mother? We invited Claudine to reside with us for several days so she and Marie Claire could spend quality time together. The stories Claudine shared were profoundly heartbreaking. She was born free in Tebaido in 1865, immediately following emancipation. Her parents succumbed to fever when she was young, and at the age of 16, she was deceived by a man offering employment, but instead imprisoned on a secluded farm. Forced to labor without compensation, she became pregnant, a result of assault by the farm supervisor, and gave birth to Marie Claire in 1885. For 2 years, she cared for her daughter while formulating an escape plan. However, when Marie Claire was 2, the child was taken from her and sold to a man Claudine knew only as Dupont. Claudine was informed that if she attempted to escape or report the incident, her daughter would be killed. She finally escaped in 1889 when the farm's owner passed away and his estate was sold. She made her way to New Orleans with nothing, secured work as a laundress, diligently saved every penny, and eventually hired an investigator. It took 8 years to locate her daughter. Marie Claire sat with her mother for hours, asking questions, holding her hand, scrutinizing her face as if committing every feature to memory. And then my daughter, our daughter, posed the question we had been dreading. Do I have to leave Papa Etienne and Mama Josephine? The room fell silent. Claudine gazed at me with tearful eyes and said, "No, my darling, you don't have to leave. You have been blessed with 2 mothers and 2 fathers who love you. I only desire to be a part of your life, if you'll have me." And so, we have established an arrangement that defies convention but feels authentic in our hearts. Claudine has secured a room near our home. She visits Marie Claire every week. Marie Claire calls her Mama Claudine and refers to me as Mama Josephine. The child now possesses 2 families, and we are all enriched by it. Margaret wiped her eyes. I was completely unaware of any of this. My grandmother referred to Claudine as Aunt Claudine, a family friend. I had no understanding that she was Marie Claire's biological mother. Vivian discovered additional letters documenting this unconventional arrangement. Claudine became integrated into the Beaumont household's extended family. She taught Marie Claire traditional Creole songs, shared stories of their Tebaido ancestors, and revealed the truth about her origins. In an 1899 letter, Josephine wrote, "Marie Claire is now 14 and comprehends the complete narrative of her early years. She knows about the kidnapping, the trafficking, the unlawful servitude. She knows about the scars on her neck and what they signify. We feared this knowledge would traumatize her, but instead, she has become passionate about justice. She expresses aspirations of becoming a lawyer or a teacher, assisting other children who have been wronged. Vivian discovered a photograph nestled within the letters, a group portrait from 1900 depicting the Beaumont family gathered in their parlor. Etienne and Josephine were seated in chairs. Marie Claire stood between them, now a young woman of 15. And beside Josephine stood another woman, older, her face bearing the marks of hardship, but her eyes radiant with joy. Claudine Thibodeau, Marie Claire's first mother, finally reunited with her daughter. 3 months after uncovering the Beaumont family photograph, Vivian stood before a packed auditorium at Tulane University, preparing to present her findings. Music. The event had attracted historians, genealogists, descendants of Louisiana's Creole families, and activists addressing issues of child trafficking and exploitation. On the screen behind her was the original 1895 photograph, the Beaumonts in their elegant parlor, Marie Claire in her lace-collared dress. But now, thanks to digital enhancement, a second image appeared alongside it. A close-up of Marie Claire's neck, the scars visible, the letters M7J legible enough to decipher. This photograph, Vivian began, is about concealment and revelation. The Beaumonts carefully posed their daughter to conceal her scars, evidence of a traumatic past they sought to shield her from. But they also preserved evidence of that past, perhaps knowing that the truth would eventually need to be told. She advanced to the next slide, the 1891 photograph of Marie Claire before her adoption. Thin and haunted, her scars fully visible. Between these two images lies a narrative of extraordinary courage from numerous individuals. Jacques Mercier, who kidnapped and held children in unlawful servitude. Etienne and Josephine Beaumont, who utilized their privilege to investigate his crimes and rescue the children. Claudine Thibodeau, who survived enslavement herself and never ceased searching for her stolen daughter. And Marie Claire, who endured trauma that would have shattered many people, but instead forged a life of purpose and advocacy. To support her claims, Vivian presented documents from her research, Etienne's journal entries, the ledgers from Mercier's house, the correspondence between Josephine and Sister Marie Teasy, the photograph of the two families united. What renders this story particularly significant, she continued, is that it unveils a largely undocumented aspect of post-Civil War history. We acknowledge that slavery legally ended in 1865, but unlawful servitude persisted for decades, particularly in the South. Children were especially vulnerable, abducted from impoverished families, marked like property, sold into servitude on remote farms where authorities rarely ventured. The Beaumont's investigation exposed a network that operated across Louisiana, involving dozens of perpetrators and potentially hundreds of victims. The majority of these children were never reunited with their families. Their stories perished with them. However, Marie Claire's story endured because individuals cared enough to document it, to preserve evidence, and to fight for justice even when authorities wouldn't. She displayed a final image, a newspaper article from 1915. The headline read, "Attorney Marie Claire Beaumont Thibodeau wins landmark case for child labor protections." Marie Claire grew up to become one of Louisiana's first black female lawyers. Vivian explained that she specialized in cases involving child exploitation and illegal labor practices. She successfully prosecuted several child trafficking operations and helped reunite over 30 children with their families. The scars she bore became her motivation to ensure other children wouldn't endure similar suffering. Margaret Thibodeau rose from the front row. "I'd like to add something, if I may." She joined Vivian at the podium. "Marie Claire was my great-grandmother. She passed away in 1963 at the age of 78. I knew her when I was young, though she never spoke to me about her early years. But she left behind journals and letters that my family is now prepared to donate to the Louisiana Historical Archives. In those documents, she wrote extensively about her two mothers, about the Beaumont family's efforts to find trafficked children, and about Claudine's determination to never give up searching. There's one passage I want to share." Margaret unfolded a paper and read, "I have two mothers, and I am blessed by both. Mama Claudine gave me life and never stopped fighting to find me. Mama Josephine gave me safety and opportunity and never stopped fighting to reunite me with my first family. Together, they taught me that love is not diminished by being shared. It multiplies." And they taught me that privilege means nothing if it's not used to help those who suffer. The audience sat in silence for a moment, then erupted in applause. After the presentation, Vivian was approached by several people with similar stories, families who suspected their ancestors had been victims of post-emancipation trafficking, descendants seeking to understand mysterious scars, and old photographs, researchers working on related topics. But the most meaningful encounter came from an elderly woman who waited until everyone else had departed. She introduced herself as Clara Dupuy and handed Vivian a photograph in a worn envelope. "This is my grandmother," she said, pointing to a young girl in the photo, perhaps 6 or 7 years old. She was found at a work camp in St. James Parish in 1888. She had marks on her shoulder. M4P. She never found her original family, but maybe with your help, we could try. Vivian looked at the photograph, then at Clara's hopeful face. M4P matched the marking on one of the other children rescued from Mercier's house, one of the 2 children whose families Etienne Beaumont had successfully located. "I think we can," Vivian said. "In fact, I think we might already have a lead." She thought of Marie Claire, standing between her 2 mothers in that 1900 photograph, whole and healed despite the scars she carried. The photograph in Vivian's office, the one that had initiated this entire investigation, was no longer just an image of concealment. It was a testament to resilience, to the power of investigative persistence, and to the revolutionary idea that families could be built on love rather than blood alone. The scars hidden beneath Marie Claire's lace collar had told a story that waited 129 years to be fully heard. And now, finally, people were listening.